On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Bren Briggs. He is the VP of DevSecOps at Hypergiant. We're going to be talking about management, but more specifically, we're going to be talking about the realities of getting to management and then what happens when you decide it's not for you and you want to go back to an IC role. I think a lot of people are in that position. A lot of people don't necessarily need to be in management. They'd be better in a technical leadership role, but obviously there are some things to deal with in that progression. Bren, thanks for being on and talking about this.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's start off real quick at the top to know what does Hypergiant do? I love the name of the company, but what do they do? And just what are some of your responsibilities there before we dive in?
Yeah, it is a cool name, isn't it? So we like to say that we help people go from data to decision. We are an AI and machine learning company. We focus on defense, critical infrastructure, and things like that. We're very big into distributed systems and data and helping people really solve their problems that they have with data. And so my responsibility there as the VP of DevSecOps is, one, figuring out how to deliver infrastructure and application support for our data scientists and developers that are solving these problems. And then when we have scaling problems, to collaboratively solve and engineer solutions to these problems with them. And within this group, within this umbrella, we have data engineering. We have more traditional kind of like cloud infrastructure. We have a couple people within the cloud infrastructure actually researching air-gapped ways of running Kubernetes and things like that. So we do actually a lot of research as well on top of our security and operational work.
Awesome. I mean, you guys sound like you're probably kept pretty busy, so I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And to dive into the topic, obviously, we're going to talk about, really the management track. We're really talking about this episode, what happens when you realize management isn't for you and the steps that happen afterwards and some of, the things that go with it. I guess maybe the start at the very top of this episode, it'd be good to maybe get your view of why moving up is expected to be a part of the progress, right? I think it's like, everyone gets a job and typically most people think I'll be a manager at some point. That means I've done well, I've moved ahead. I mean, you don't always have to be a people manager, but the people management side is still, a very viable track. And why do you think that is? Like, is that just part of our culture? Is that just, it's ingrained and entrenched in the career process and it's kind of hard to buck?
I think there's several things here. One is that humans are just hopelessly attracted to hierarchy. We love having somebody in charge of us, and we also love being in charge of somebody else. And that's baked into our culture basically everywhere, all around the world. It's hard to find like a truly flat organization or society. There's always somebody running it somewhere. There's always and beyond, the actual formal assignment of authority, there's people who end up naturally leading. They have kind of that magnetic personality and they project that kind of soft power. And typically, as with every discipline, with everything that you do, the better you get at it, the more responsibility you accumulate. So I think that management looks like the natural upward progression. When you get better at the thing that you do, you're entrusted with more responsibility. And historically, that means taking charge of other people doing something that you used to do. And I think it's valid. I think it is valid in a lot of ways to say that management is a step up, but that doesn't mean it's a step up on the same skill path. Like at some point, if you think about it like a video game, your skill tree has a fork in it, and you can spend points in one track or you can spend points in another. And spending points in both means that you don't advance in both as fast. So what do you do if you want to advance? And I think that's where management comes in. It's something that allows you to take on additional skills and develop a whole new role that you can function in.
That's definitely interesting. I think you're right. I mean, I think it's pretty universal that the person that seems to be more expert should manage the people that are not as expert as that person. And I think that goes into sometimes, I mean, it's not for this podcast, it's a whole different episode, but sometimes the question is, do you take your most skilled engineer. I don't want to use the word best, but your most skilled engineer, and have them be a people manager, because obviously doesn't always mean that that works out, but we'll kind of, and maybe we'll segue into that.
Seen it happen, right? Is it a good decision?
Yeah, it's and if that person doesn't have people management skills that are equal to the expertise that they bring to the table, that's where you potentially run into these issues. And I guess, to kind of, focus on this episode of, when somebody does move into management, right? Let's actually fast forward and go, hey, somebody is in management, they got promoted, they're doing the job, and they start going, I really still enjoy the technical side. I really miss that side. Or they start realizing to the point is that they're not as expert in management as they are expert in the skill or craft that they're working on. What are some of the signs that, hey, you know what, maybe this wasn't right. Maybe not the right step. I should think about maybe something, not a step back, but a different alternative path.
Personally, I have promoted a few people into management and watched many, many others step from some sort of team lead or senior engineer into an engineering management role. And it was exactly that. We took our best expert on the team that we're like, oh, this person has the deepest expertise in this particular problem area. And now all of a sudden they're a manager, and it's a completely different skill set. And they struggle to adapt because they struggle to understand what it is they're doing. I think, and the same exact thing happened to me. And I was very blessed to have a great mentor and managers around me at the time when this happened, when I got promoted in. But really what happens is engineers are very focused on metrics that kind of have very short turnaround times, typically. So unless you're a staff engineer and you're used to building whole platforms that take years to get going, most of the time you're kind of operating on like a 1 hour feedback loop. You write a test, you write some code. Now your code passes the test, you make the commits, you push, you open a PR, you move on. Maybe you're doing a PR or two a day or something like that. You get really quick, instantaneous gratification for knowing whether or not anything works. And then you move into management, and now you go from this world of very clear feedback on whether or not what you did works into this world where now you have to manage personalities that are squishy and may not behave consistently from day to day. And you're now dealing with information as your primary thing instead of code. And you have to manage everybody's context to information or everybody's attention span or something like that. Like of the team that I've been managing at Hypergiant, we have 8 people and like 6 of them have ADHD, myself included. Like that presents an extra challenge to how you manage teams. And so the signs that I see is when a person becomes a manager and they still have more commits than everybody else on the team. That's like a number one indication that you're going to have problems in about 4 weeks, because they're going to burn out trying to do both jobs at 100%. And really what you have to do is you have to be okay with stepping back significantly. You're still technical. Like you don't just check your brain at the door when you become a manager. You're still very technical. And the reason that you are a successful manager is because you have great technical background. But now it's your time to use that expertise to multiply yourself instead of going and doing all the technical work. And I think that if you see an engineer that becomes a manager that is still trying to engineer in all of the ways that you can think of. So if they're still frequently opening pull requests, if they're on the critical path for anything, if they're in too many meetings and they're not paying attention to their team because they're trying to get all this other information, or you see them working like 10, 12, 14 hours a day or something like that. As their manager or as a peer manager, you should be looking out for those sorts of signs in the first few weeks, because if you see those and those don't get corrected, those snowball into almost like a burnout really quickly, that somebody's going to crash and burn and leave your company, or crash and burn and they're going to hurt themselves. Not like self-harm. I mean, like, this is going to cause lasting damage to their ability to both be an engineer and a manager. And it's just not a healthy situation when you see somebody doing that. So really, you need a significant amount of coaching as well when somebody comes into this position for the first time.
And I think that's a good point. I think, the person who becomes an expert, typically they are coming from some training platform, whether it's university, a boot camp, self-learning. There's some form of education that's put them on a track to build their expertise, right? It could be just all by yourself, whatever. But once you get to management, unless you're actually going through, again, similar education program, self-educating yourself, whatever it is, now you're entering someplace where it becomes trial by fire, where you're expected to also execute. I think that's now, like, to me, I've heard it enough times now, that's the consistent problem of getting to management. You're expert at the skill doesn't necessarily translate to the expert at the management. And I think what you just described is having somebody who goes into that role, doesn't know what to do. Do you think, like, when it comes to taking that step from that senior IC to management, should there just be more training? I mean, obviously it's hard because the person who's managing already is responsible for managing a team. Mentoring is an overhead to ask that person to get somebody else ramped up and ready to be a manager as well. I mean, that all sounds like just more complexity.
It is more complexity. Yeah, you are introducing new elements into this process, into this kind of this mentorship or this growth process. I think, though, that it's one that you can't afford not to pay, because if you look at places with the most successful leaders and the most successful hierarchical structures, I would argue that's probably the military. And a great example of that, I come from the Air Force, and so we train leaders literally from the moment you show up to boot camp. We are training people to be leaders of other people, and if you spend your entire enlistment and you never go beyond being a senior airman, I promise you that you were at least the leader of a work detail at some point. We practice this all the time. It's in our blood. We practice it. In order to make it to staff sergeant and above, you have to pass classes that are effectively management classes. You take not just project management, but people management. And so the jokes about the Air Force being a corporation are completely true. We are a corporation in uniform. It's 100% true. Like I work with the Air Force now as a civilian, the Air Force, Space Force, all day long, all the time. Nothing has changed. They just want to be a startup. They really want to be a startup really bad. But they're really good at leadership. They're really good at people management. There are terrible people managers out there who inevitably get promoted anyway. But the Air Force is like, their idea, I guess, is we would rather promote a couple of crappy managers and teach everybody to manage than the opposite. And only, like, we have survivorship bias now when it comes to managers in tech. The people that made it through the gauntlet and didn't crumble whenever they got promoted with no support are the managers today. And that is really bad, because now we're going to bias for other people who look like that.
Absolutely. Well, first, obviously, thank you for your service. I mean, that's you spent a career in that in the Air Force, and some of that is now the cornerstone. It sounds like your philosophy, maybe even going forward. But I guess that survivorship's an interesting statement. I guess the challenge is there's no, the Air Force is an organization that's built a leadership program, right? A center of excellence to make sure when you come out, in the program, obviously I've never been in the military, so correct me if I'm wrong, but they need you to be a leader. I mean, that's what the whole point of military is. You need that leadership. It's, life or death. I've had people on with service backgrounds, and obviously we always, talk about how imperative the role is, but an organization of any size that is not maybe as well defined as a military organization might not have a leadership center of excellence.
That's very true.
And sometimes, I guess I know a lot of times you see people take people from technical boot camps and ramp them up. And it seems, again, easier to take somebody with that baseline of expertise to build them up. But to have a leadership center of excellence, be like, listen, before you become a leader, we know you're going to get there. This is what you're going to go through. Let's see how you do. If this is the right thing, we'll tell through this process. Obviously, it might not be what somebody wants to hear through their career, but obviously, if they're going to excel, they're going to benefit a lot. And I think what you're been talking about is, in the absence of that, and without having that support system, a lot of organizations don't have. What do you do with that person? What does that person do? Do they feel defeated and go back to an IC role, which isn't fair because maybe that's really where they excel? Or, what does that person do in the case of, hey, listen, they just haven't taken to management?
I think this is a fair question, and there are people like that. So I first met him when I got to Hypergiant, and we've become really, really close friends. And I've I've offered him the opportunity to promote and become a manager many times, and he's always said no. I just I don't want to be the face. I don't want to be responsible. I want to just do the work, and I respect that. And that's and there's several people like that and personality types like that, where they do their best work when you give them, and they're their happiest when you give them like very clear direction, and you step back and you walk away and you let them work their magic because they love doing that. And when those people find themselves in management somehow, either voluntarily or otherwise, and they go, oh crap, am I in the wrong spot? That's where I think a culture of leadership that values feedback, and that also a culture of leadership that prioritizes psychological safety is essential. Because your person, let's say you're a manager of managers, your brand new manager that comes to you will never tell you, I think I'm screwing up. I think I'm not going to make it. I think I'm going to blow this, or I'm not cut out for this. They will never tell you that if there's not a culture of safety. So first of all, you have to have a culture of psychological safety to do this. Second of all, when you do that, I think even at the smallest of companies, there is room for a very clear differentiation between senior IC and management. And you have those parallel tracks, even if they're not, again, startup land is everything is very fluid. So say that you're at a 10 or 15 person startup, and a person, they put on a director hat and they said, nope, this isn't for me. Let them take it off. It's okay. They can still be an IC and fold in somewhere else. And nothing is permanent. You can absolutely go do that. And they haven't lost any value. I don't know. Pick your argument. Do you want this to be an economic one? Do you want this to be an ethical one? You can make a great case for the equal worth and dignity of a person as an IC over a manager all day long. Matter of fact, managers are just overhead. If you're a senior IC, you've got it made. A manager really should view it not as a power trip, but as a tour of duty. It's a service that you're performing.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think part of, I think, I wrote down culture of psychological safety. And I think that's really a great way of saying it, because when it doesn't work out, right, you have to have this person, you still want the person on the, in the company and your team, they're productive. You just need to properly transition them to a better role. It could be a technical leadership track, moving them back to their old role. But you obviously have seen this person in leadership. They're taking a step back potentially to go back to an IC role. There's such a delicate balance to make sure that that person is still, that situation's handled correctly. I mean, there's so many factors. I was going to just mention one or two, but there's just a plethora of things that could go right or wrong. But making it go right seems a lot more difficult than potentially making a mistake.
I agree, right? So you can absolutely handle it poorly very easily. You can miscommunicate and say, well, they failed and we're sending them back, right? We're sending them back to the minor leagues here. And that's like the exact situation you want to avoid. I think the communication should be, this person tried the hat on, and we mutually agreed that they didn't want to do it. It wasn't going to work out. And we've found the ideal spot for them where they're going to do their best. And I think we just put it like that. And I think also the door is not necessarily closed. It's not like you only get one shot. And I think that's also important to know that it's not necessarily a ladder or a one-way street. I hate that I keep doing this, but it's the best analogies. These the culture that we have established in the Air Force for this is, and the same goes for all the branches. And this is just what we do. So we have in the Air Force. So in the, I think in other branches, a first sergeant is a rank and not necessarily a duty position, but in the Air Force, it's a duty position. And a first sergeant is sort of the liaison between the enlisted force and the commander. And it's a duty that you perform. It's not a rank. You are addressed as first sergeant, but it's a duty that you perform. And it's also a fixed term. You can sign up for additional ones, but really it's a fixed term. And so you do it for 2 years, and then you either renew or you step away, and no hard feelings. And so I think you can also do this as like a probationary thing for new managers. You say, hey, listen, I need you to go run this team for like 6 months. Like, tell me how you feel. And we'll check in. We'll do frequent check-ins or something like that. You put a term on it at which they can walk away, no hard feelings. And I think the other thing that you do is you have people constantly training by leading in small teams. So for instance, you take a Tiger team of like 4 or 5 people and dispatch somebody onto it for a month or 2, and you coach them and you say, all right, look, how does this feel? Are you getting the feel for this? Do you know what you're doing? Do you have questions? And I think you will promote far fewer people into management who didn't want to be there or who are going to, wash out, because you're filtering them early by letting people get small doses of this and deciding whether or not they are interested.
Yeah, it's interesting. This, when we first talked about this topic, it actually resonated with me because I remember my own father. He was in sales and he got promoted to being a manager. He was not as good as he was in sales, and when he had to take a step back, obviously that's a whole different environment. It was not handled well, and he never seemingly did well where he was, so he had to go someplace else, which was kind of sad. But I think this is where, when you're talking about some of the things that you could put in place and handling that culture of psychological safety, this relationship that exists that is so delicately balanced within an org, and now people are remote, it's even trickier to fully appreciate the person's state of mind, how they're doing, just because we've lost the touch point. So I think some of what you mentioned, obviously having someone run a Tiger team and really let them get their feet wet and go, is this for you? If not, there's an alternative path. Like, here's this other thing you could do that's going to equal fulfill you, but maybe you just haven't thought about it because this seems to be the more obvious option for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and that's what I try to do, and I think that everybody needs at least the experience of doing it for a little while, because beyond that, it builds empathy with managers, because your manager is not the person who automatically knows all the context and has all the information and just made the bad decision just to spite you. Like, your manager is a very flawed, fallible human, and is likely doesn't really know what's going on any more than you do in some cases. And their job is honestly to pick a course and stick to it, or like, they're basically what they're doing. They're just guiding the next step over and over again. So yeah, I think that builds empathy. It's like, oh, well, I wouldn't have made this decision, but I can see how they would have, given the context and information that they had, instead of, that manager sucks. These guys never know what's going on, which I hear a lot. And I say that a lot, even as a person who's been a manager for a while. Like, I build that empathy. I'm like, what is going on over here? And so I do think that builds empathy, and it also helps improve the communication between managers and the teams that they're serving. Because now, if you're working on teams with people who have managed people, they know what information you're interested in proactively, and they can give it to you without you having to fish for it.
I love it, man. I think we could probably keep the conversation going and dive deeper and deeper. I'm cognizant of our time. I was going to ask you a couple of wrap-up questions, let you get back to your day. So I've been asking guests to leave a question or topic they'd like a future guest to answer. I was going to see if there's something you'd like a podcast covering, so that you could listen to it and enjoy it. And I'm sure there would as well, but if there's something that stands out to you.
What do you do when you're burnt out but you can't stop? Is there a way forward, or is it just hopeless?
I like that. I haven't covered that one yet, so I'm hoping maybe we'll find somebody. That's a great one. I guess from that standpoint, I'll see if I can find somebody. I'd love to cover that now. I'm thinking about that one now. If somebody does want to reach out to you, we talked a lot about a lot of different areas of management on this episode. If somebody wants to reach out just for picking your brain or just furthering the conversation, what's a good way of reaching out to you? LinkedIn, Twitter, email?
Twitter, I think, is probably the best way. Okay. So my DMs are open. Okay. I lurk more these days than I post, but I'm definitely very active. So you can get me at 0xfrac, FRAQ.
Okay, cool. We'll include that in the show notes as well. So if anybody wants to follow up with Bren, hit him up on Twitter. He will respond to you. Bren, again, thanks for being on.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, man. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guests, different topic. If you did find the episode useful, share it. That's how we've grown, and I appreciate everyone does. And if you know someone that can talk about the topic Bren brought up, which is talking about burnout and not being able to stop, and is there a way forward, or how do you deal with it? I think it's a great topic. Please reach out. I'd love to have you on and hear your thoughts. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.